Ibn Taymiyya, the so-called Sunni theologian, has a very strange argument in his writings where he tries to refute Shia Islam. He uses the beliefs of the Christians and the Jews to argue that it is completely absurd to view any of the companions of the Prophet of Islam as corrupt. I argue that Ibn Taymiyya aims to keep the general population under a spell. He aims to keep the great cycle of history hidden from you, that is. I will dismantle Ibn Taymiyya's argument piece by piece over the next 3 videos titled Ibn Taymiyya's Paradox, Ibn Taymiyya's Blunder, and Ibn Taymiyya's Ignorance. In upcoming videos, I'll be looking at how the Bible and Torah speak about Prophet Moses and Prophet Jesus, peace be upon them, prophesying about how their closest companions will betray them. And I'll be comparing these prophecies and acts of betrayal to the case of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family. In today's video, I'll be introducing you to my evaluation triangle, a framework that allows you to determine when an argument is trying to keep you away from provable historical or theological truths by framing them as improbable, implausible, or even impossible, convincing you that they aren't worth your time to investigate further. We'll discover where on this triangle Ibn Taymiyya's argument falls, and how it cunningly uses carefully crafted vagueness to formulate a highly deceptive argument. I'll reveal how this argument uses the manipulative device of misdirection to force you to look the wrong way. Sounds like something only the devil would do, don't you think? Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let me show you what I have to show you, and you can be the judge. This argument, which for convenience I have named the Companion's Paradox argument, will help us reveal the active attempt of covering up the realities of history and religion. In particular, the realities of history's greatest cover-up, the Great Cycle, and the hijacking of Islam. I speak about this great cycle in my video essay titled How Sunnis Hijacked Islam 1,400 Years Ago, where I paint a picture of its key components. If you haven't seen it already, definitely check it out. But for today, let's refresh our memory. God sends a prophet to a people that follow the corrupt form of the religion of God. The prophet guides them back to the correct form of the religion of God and guarantees their guidance by announcing a divinely appointed successor. And the people who live with the prophet corrupt the religion of God upon the prophet's departure by betraying the divinely appointed successor and following another man in his place. But you don't need to hear it from me. Modern day so-called Sunni scholars and speakers are often caught parroting the argument. So let's give them the honors.
They said, you ask the Jews, who are the best people? They said the followers of Moses. You ask the Christians, who are the best people? The followers of who? Of Jesus. You ask Rafida, the worst people who? The followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the best man that walked on the face of the earth, Allah chose for him the worst companions. Aqlan doesn't make any sense.
Our brother, he mentioned this, subhanallah. The Jews and the Christians, they say the best people are the companions of Jesus and the companions of Moses. The Rafid, the Shia, they say the worst people are the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
يعني ما أعجب ما قيل أن اليهود سئلوا من خير أهل ملتكم قالوا أصحاب موسى. سئل النصارى من خير أهل ملتكم قالوا حواري عيسى. وسئل الرافضة من شر أهل ملتكم قالوا أصحاب محمد.
يعني لو سألت اليهود من خير الناس قالوا أصحاب موسى، ولو سألت النصارى من خير الناس قالوا أصحاب عيسى، ولو سألت الروافض من شر الناس قالوا أصحاب محمد.
It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? This group say the companions of their prophet were the best of the nation. That group say the companions of their prophet were the best of the nation. But the Shia, this argument lives merely on its rhetorical power. And we don't care about rhetorical power, not unless it is built on proper argumentation and proper reasoning, which this argument clearly is not. To the untrained eye, or the good-hearted Shia, or even to the reasonable, educated so-called Sunni, this argument may at face value appear to just be a bad argument, an argument that hasn't been thought through very well. But, as usual, it is a lot more sinister than that. I'll demonstrate that this argument is not bad because of poor logic or anything of that sort, but rather that the bad argumentation is a necessity born out of the fact that the argument has been engineered to misdirect you and mislead you. It is because it intentionally plays with the facts in a very calculated manner in order to misguide you. While the lack of veracity in the companion's paradox argument makes it sound like it was devised by the Salafi pseudo-intellectuals themselves, as you've probably guessed already, they are merely parroting the argument. But parroting it from who? Well, let's start by looking at the textual sources for this argument. Let's try to track down its origins. How far back in Islamic history does this argument go? From my introduction, you've probably already understood that those using the companion's paradox argument today are most likely pulling it from Ibn Taymiyya, a scholar they love more than any other. We can find this argument in his famous work, Minhaj as-Sunnah, a book Ibn Taymiyya authored during the 700s, contextually speaking, about 700 years ago today. In the introduction of the book, Ibn Taymiyya explains that the motive behind the book was to refute Shia Islam, to refute a particularly influential Shia of his time, Allam al-Hilli of the 7th century. Ibn Taymiyya was attempting to refute Allam al-Hilli's work, Minhaj al-Karama. A number of people from Ahl al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah brought to me a book that was written by one of the Rafida scholars of our time, Allam al-Hilli, to promote his merchandise and invite people to the creed of the Imamiyya Rafida. Those who brought the book mentioned that it was one of their most influential works in establishing their creed among the rulers and others who inclined towards them. I wonder how many from the general population of the Salafis have ever bothered to read the work that it aims to critique, or how many have even heard of the work, Minhaj al-Karama, or how many have heard of the author even, Allam al-Hilli. I would presume very few, but Ibn Taymiyya goes on to describe how Allam al-Hilli's book was so powerful, so influential, that people were coming to Ibn Taymiyya pleading for him to reply. The arguments were so well-founded, so convincing, that people were telling Ibn Taymiyya if he failed to reply to the work, it would be seen as an abandonment of the Muslims. They asked me to reveal the misguidance and falsehood contained within it, as doing so supports the cause of Allah's believing slaves and exposes the falsehoods of the slanderous atheists. When they persistently requested a refutation of this clear misguidance, arguing that ignoring it would be betrayal of the believers and that the wrongdoers might assume we are incapable of refuting this fabrication, I wrote what Allah made easy in explanation. This book was titled Minhaj al-Kirama fi Ma'rifat al-Imama, though it is more befitting to call it Minhaj al-Nadama, the path of regret. It's interesting to see how Ibn Taymiyya describes his authoring of Minhaj as-Sunnah as what Allah made easy for him in explanation. Well, let's take a look at his God-given ease in action. Here's the companion's paradox argument as found in Minhaj as-Sunnah. Al-Sha'bi told me the Jews and the Christians were favored over the Rafida in two ways. The Jews were asked, "Who are the best people of your nation?" They said, "The companions of Moses." The Christians were asked, "Who are the best people of your nation?" They said, "The disciples of Jesus." And the Rafida were asked, "Who are the worst people of your nation?" They said, "The companions of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him." If people are scurrying to you, pleading to address a crisis of faith, I'm not sure this quality of refutation is suitable, nor would I be confident enough to say God has eased the explanation for me. While you can't judge an entire book by a single argument, once we unravel how deceptive this argument is, you will understand that there is no excuse for a supposed learned man to use such a deceptive argument, let alone a leading scholar who they call Shaykh al-Islam. And Ibn Taymiyya would take the entire blame had he been the originator of this argument. But was he the originator of this argument? While Ibn Taymiyya is quite an old scholar, living over 700 years ago, the argument is actually much older than him. The argument is in fact over 1,400 years old. Yes, the companion's paradox argument originates from the very early years of Islam, from the very first century of Islam. The man who seemingly first propagated the companion's paradox argument is well known to so-called Sunnis as Imam al-Sha'bi. He was born in 19 AH, just 9 years after the martyrdom of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, and lived during the reign of Umar ibn al-Khattab. He lived through the reign of Uthman ibn Affan and Imam Ali, peace be upon him, as well as the illegal takeover by Muawiyah, Yazid, and 7 more of the Umayyad tyrants. Al-Sha'bi lived during key early Islamic events, such as the burning of the Hadith, the Muslim revolt against Uthman, the Battle of the Camel, the Battle of Siffin, the assassination of Imam Ali, peace be upon him, the poisoning of Imam al-Hassan, peace be upon him, and the Battle of Karbala and the Battle of Al-Harra. While Al-Sha'bi missed the Prophet by just 9 years, and so is not classed as a companion, he is classed as a tabi'i, a man who lived in the post-Prophet era among the companions of the Prophet. The famous 3rd century so-called Sunni scholar and historian At-Tabari validates the authority of Al-Sha'bi in so-called Sunni Islam, stating that he was a man of manners, understanding and knowledge. And Ibn Hajar from the 8th century, one of the greatest so-called Sunni scholars of hadith and biographical evaluation, says that Al-Sha'bi was a trustworthy and well-known scholar. Clearly Al-Sha'bi holds great importance in so-called Sunni Islam. With that confirmed, here is Al-Sha'bi himself introducing the companion's paradox argument for the first time to the Muslim world, an argument that would be parroted 7 centuries later by Ibn Taymiyya and 14 centuries later by Uthman al-Khamis and Shamsi. Malik ibn Muawiyah said that Al-Sha'bi said to him, "The Jews and the Christians have 2 good traits that set them apart from the Rafida." The Jews were asked, "Who are the best of your nation?" And they said, "The companions of Moses." And the Christians were asked, "Who are the best people of your nation?" And they said, "The companions of Jesus." But when the Rafida were asked, "Who are the worst people of your nation?" they said, "The companions of Muhammad." With such frail arguments floating around during the very early years of Islam, you're immediately able to understand 3 things. The first is that the Shia were being referred to as Rafida, as we saw in Al-Sha'bi's text, from the very beginning. 2 is that the belief in the companions being the worst of the nation and betraying the Prophet also existed from the very beginning. And 3, that their lies and anti-Shia propaganda and attempts at covering up the realities of history also existed from the very beginning. But these 3 very important points are not our focus today, unfortunately. 1,400 years after its inception, let us begin dismantling the companion's paradox argument. We've heard the argument travel across 3 different eras, the 1st century to the 7th century to today, the 15th century AH. To make sure we've understood the argument, so that we can properly dismantle it, let's get some visuals in here. Let's draw out the argument in the exact same manner that it was verbalized by Uthman al-Khamis and Shamsi. Let's begin with the first premise.
They said, you ask the Jews, who are the best people? They said the followers of Moses.
By followers, he means the companions, as he clarifies later and as the original argument stipulates. But good, the first premise of his argument is, Jews claim the companions of their prophets were the best of the nation.
You ask the Christians, who are the best people? The followers of who? Of Jesus.
So the second premise is that Christians claim the companions of their prophets were the best of the nation.
You ask Rafida, the worst people who? The followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
So the third premise is that Shia claim the companions of their prophet were the worst of the nation. Okay, so Shamsi, what are you trying to say exactly? What is the insight behind all this? Well, it's obvious. What he is feeding you is the following conclusion. A companion of a prophet being the worst of the nation is entirely implausible. Now that we have the argument written down in a structured manner, if we're going to dismantle it, we need to know where the argument lies in my evaluation triangle. The triangle forms a logical hierarchy to aid in evaluating a thing, especially if it is contested, subject to interpretation, or related to a historical reality. Generally speaking, the higher up the level of evaluation and argument, the more superior it is. There are some exceptions to this, but we'll come to that later. At the bottom of the triangle, you have the most basic form of evaluation that assesses if a thing is even possible, by default overruling if the thing is plausible, probable, or even provable. Digging in your back garden and finding Sauron's one ring forged in the fires of Mount Doom, that's impossible. Above this level exists a more narrow and direct level of evaluation, assessing the plausibility. This holds the assumption that it is possible and focuses on how reasonable or believable a thing is. You claim to have found the ring of King Henry VIII, who lived 500 years ago, buried in your back garden. I guess that's not impossible, but it's definitely highly implausible. The third level of the evaluation hierarchy is on probability. At this level, you may acknowledge a thing is within the realms of plausibility, but you are determining how probable it is to actually have taken place. If you claim to have found the ring of Queen Elizabeth II buried in your back garden, and you happen to live near Buckingham Palace, this is possible, and it is somewhat plausible, but generally speaking, it isn't very probable. The fourth and final level, the king of all forms of evaluation, is provability. Proving something with direct evidence demonstrates that a thing is beyond being possible, plausible, and probable. It is for certain. If you claim to have found a box buried in your back garden that contains the ring of Winston Churchill and a letter signed by the man himself, and if forensics authenticates the handwriting and signature and scientific dating methods verify the date of the letter, this is now provable. As I intend to prove in the future, many so-called Sunni arguments tend to the bottom of the evaluation triangle, oftentimes to the lowest level, trying to prove a thing as impossible, even if mountains of provable evidence exists. But where does the companion's paradox argument fall on this triangle? Well, the argument tries to contrast the Christian and Shia views of the companions of their prophet being the best of their nations with the Shia view of the companions of the Prophet of Islam being the worst of the nation, trying to argue that Shia Islam's perspective is not believable or unreasonable, and thus it being implausible. In today's video, we are assessing the true plausibility of this argument, and in future videos, we'll upgrade the argument to higher levels. We'll adapt the argument to the level of probability, and then to the level of provability. I mentioned earlier that the higher up an argument in the evaluation triangle, the more superior it is. But lower level arguments are not always bad, depending on the context. For example, if you are lacking in provable data, or you are using a lower level argument to support the conclusion of a higher level argument. But what is strictly not appropriate and clear-cut deception is lingering in lower level arguments in order to detract or avoid higher level conclusions. This is exactly what the companion's paradox argument does. Its goal, as I said earlier, is to misdirect people from the realities of history. You can tell when an argument from lower levels carries this deception when you assess the argument and discover that the information it provides is highly modified, twisted, and vague. Vagueness can be a powerful tool for one intent on being deceptive. It creates ambiguity and leaves room for misinterpretation. By being vague, a person eliminates the specific details that get in the way of the conclusion that they prefer. In essence, they use vagueness to warp reality to match their own desires. You'll come to see that vagueness is scattered all over the companion's paradox argument. First, let's look at the hidden premise within the argument. We looked earlier at a form of the argument I called the verbal form. But this form does not fully represent what they are trying to communicate. The argument contains an additional hidden premise baked into it, conveniently kept so vague that you can't even see it. Based on just the literal words that they use, one would assume that it's a simple comparison, comparing the Christian and Jewish positions to the Shia position, resulting in the conclusion that the Shia position is implausible. But this isn't the case. If you listen closely, you can hear an inherent bias in their speech. There's something else to the argument.
They said, you ask the Jews, who are the best people? They said the followers of Moses. You ask the Christians, who are the best people? The followers of who? Of Jesus. You ask Rafida, the worst people who? The followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the best man that walked on the face of the earth, Allah chose for him the worst companions. Aqla doesn't make any sense.
Look at the common sense Christian and Jewish views that aligns with so-called Sunni Islam. And look at the incoherent Shia view, which misaligns with so-called Sunni Islam. But where is the mention of the so-called Sunni position in the argument? It doesn't exist, because this argument is more of a hypnosis attempt rather than a real argument. It's attempting to make you dizzy so that it can misdirect you to something sinister. The so-called Sunni position belongs here as the first premise, as it is their initial assumption. So-called Sunnis claim the companions of their prophet were the best of the nation. This is what I will refer to as the original argument. We'll find out in the next video why they wanted to minimize attention to the first premise. It has to do with the argument being circular. But we'll leave that for next time. Today I want to focus on the vagueness, and the vagueness is not only present in the first premise, it is all over the argument. The position of so-called Sunnis is vague, the position of the Jews is vague, as is the position of the Christians and the Shia. All four are vague. Vague, vague, vague. So let's fix it. Let's fix the vagueness with visuals. Let's plot the verbal form of the argument on this matrix. The columns represent the level of specificity or vagueness regarding the companions. On the left, we have all the companions, specific and clear. On the right, we have segments of the companions, also specific and clear. And smack down in the middle, we have the companions, perfectly vague. The rows represent the position a religious group takes towards the companions of their prophet. We have best of the nation, and we have worst of the nation. Now let's bring in good old Shamsi to fill in the table for us, in line with the verbal form of the argument.
They said, you ask the Jews, who are the best people? They said the followers of Moses.
So apparently the Jews say that the best of people were the companions of Moses. So the Jews go here. While Shamsi used the word followers, he does mean companions, as he confirms later in the clip. But please, do continue, Shamsi.
You ask the Christians, who are the best people? The followers of who? Of Jesus.
So the Christians apparently say that the best of people were the companions of Jesus. So Christians go here.
You ask Rafida, the worst people who? The followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
And the Shia apparently claim that the worst of people were the companions of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family. And so the Shia go here on the table. And finally, let's tack on the hidden premise of the so-called Sunni view that the best of the nation were the companions of the Prophet. Hence, so-called Sunni Islam goes here. Now you can see what the argument does. It groups up the so-called Sunni, Christian, and Jewish positions and isolates the Shia position, making the Shia position seem as though it is absurd and implausible. But remember, it achieves this isolation by way of deception. It is not valid, as we'll soon find out. And it's not just me who's picked up on it. It was interesting to see a Shia brother from the crowd step up and challenge Shamsi's teacher, Hassan as-Somali, when Hassan as-Somali brought forth this vague Shia position.
Our brother, he mentioned this, subhanallah. The Jews and the Christians, they say the best people are the companions of Jesus and the companions of Moses. The Rafid, the Shia, they say the worst people are the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Absolutely not. That's a lie. That is a lie. That is a lie. We do not say that.
He said
those who are munafiqun.
He looked
We
into
say
the
those
hearts
who have been
of
censored in the
mankind.
Quran. We say those who have been censored by the Prophet. They are the ones we say, and not someone we can follow. We follow those that the Prophet says follow. And we stay away from those who the Prophet says stay away from.
Hassan as-Somali doesn't want to hear none of it. God forbid you give a Shia a chance to talk. But the Shia brother was right. This argument is not an accurate representation of the Shia position, nor of the Christian position, nor of the Jewish position. So let's now begin to unravel this vagueness by first tackling the Shia position that was challenged by the Shia crowd member. The Companions' Paradox argument puts forth the vague claim that the Shia say the companions of their prophet were the worst of the nation. But which Shia believes this? The Shia brother from the crowd who challenged Hassan as-Somali. He certainly didn't. Now yes, the Shia position is embedded within this vague claim, but it is not accurate enough to properly represent the full Shia position. I found a quote by Muhammad at-Tijani, a famous Tunisian so-called Sunni scholar who converted to Shia Islam. In his famous work, Then I Was Guided, at-Tijani explains his journey to Shia Islam and what he discovered to be the actual Shia position of the companions of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family. Through my discussions with Shia scholars, I discovered that in their view, the companions were divided into 3 categories. The first included the good companions. They were truly his friends by words and deeds, and they never abandoned him. The second category were the companions who embraced Islam and followed the Messenger of God, either through choice or fear. However, they hurt the Messenger of God on a few occasions and did not always follow his orders. The third type of companions were hypocrites, who accompanied the Messenger of God to deceive him. They pretended to be Muslims, but inside themselves they were bent on blasphemy and on deceiving Islam and the Muslims as a whole. I have changed the companions who turned back on their heels, like Muawiyah, Amr ibn al-As, al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah, Abu Hurairah, Ikrama, Ka'b al-Ahbar, and others, for the grateful companions who never broke the promise they gave to the Prophet, like Ammar ibn Yasir, Salman al-Farisi, Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswad, Khuzayma ibn Thabit, and others. And praise be to God for this enlightenment. This is the well-known Shia position. The companions of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family were of different categories, different statuses. Some were the best of the best, and some were the worst of the worst, and there were many in between. So to correct the vague Shia position that this argument puts forth, we can say that the Shia position is not that the companions of the Prophet were the worst of the nation, but rather that a segment of the companions were the best of the nation, like Aaron and others, and a segment of the companions were the worst of the nation, like those Rabbi Greenstein spoke of. So this is where the Shia actually belong. We're coming real close now to understanding why this vagueness is being used. It is very carefully calculated, I tell you. But we need to clear up more of the vagueness before that becomes apparent. Let's move on to fixing the vague so-called Sunni position in the argument. Now remember, the so-called Sunni position of the companions was not even verbalized in the argument, but was hidden. And since the argument is presenting the Christian and Jewish views as those that align with the so-called Sunni view, the statement that people would understand or would absorb would be, so-called Sunnis claim the companions of their Prophet were the best of the nation. But if you want to ignore that, since it wasn't actually verbalized, no problem. But we still need to know what is the actual, accurate, non-vague, so-called Sunni position on the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family. To find out, let's go to Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani of the 9th century, one of their most beloved scholars. The Ahlul Sunnah have unanimously agreed that they, the companions, are all just, with no opposition to this except for some fringe groups of innovators. This is the position of all of the scholars, and those whose opinions are relied upon. Yes, Ibn Hajar speaks the truth. In so-called Sunni Islam, all the companions of the Prophet are upright and just. They all collectively hold the title of best generation. So let's correct the so-called Sunni position in the argument. Instead of it saying the companions were the best of the nation, let's say so-called Sunnis claim all companions of their Prophet were the best of the nation. So the so-called Sunni position actually belongs here. So we can see now that with the vagueness eliminated from the Shia and so-called Sunni positions, that they are in fact polar opposites, but not opposites vertically in the way that the argument initially framed them to be. One saying the companions were the best, and the other saying the companions were the worst, but rather the opposition lies horizontally in the specificity of the groupings, with one side applying a blanket position to all companions, while the other applying the positions to segments of the companions. Without even considering the Christian or Jewish viewpoints, one can already see which position is truly implausible. That all the companions were the best of the nation, or that segments of the companions were the best and segments of companions were the worst. It doesn't take much brain power to figure that one out. But with the Shia and so-called Sunni positions now properly mapped out, we must continue with the argument's logic. The argument pinned itself on the idea that the Christian and Jewish views aligning with the so-called Sunni view made it the plausible view, and making the Shia view the implausible one. So let us then assess the Jewish and Christian positions and determine their proper positioning when they are not provided in such a vague manner. Do they still align with so-called Sunni Islam? The Companions' Paradox argument states that the Christians claim the companions of their prophet were the best of their nation. Anyone who knows anything about Christianity knows this is not the full story. This time I'll summon the help of Ellen G. White, one of the co-founders of the Protestant Seventh-day Adventist Church, and viewed from the 100 most significant American figures of all time.
There has ever been two classes among those who profess to be followers of Christ. Even in her best estate, the church was not composed wholly of the true, pure and sincere. Among the 12 apostles was a traitor.
She says that there has ever been two classes among those who followed Christ, and even among the apostles was a traitor. Ellen G. White informs us that the Christian position of the companions of Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, is that they were of different categories. So the position of Christians is not that the companions were the best of the nation, but rather, and more specifically, is that a segment of the companions were the best of the nation and a segment of the companions were the worst of the nation.
So the Christian position should be here.
So-called Sunni Islam has lost one ally. For this argument to hold any weight beyond this point, they pin their hopes on the Jews. Just as with the Christian position, the Companions' Paradox argument states that the Jews claim the companions of their prophet were the best of their nation. But can this really be what Jews say about their history and about the companions of their prophet? Let's gain some clarity on the actual Jewish position from Rabbi Greenstein, the professor of Hebrew at the Academy for Jewish Religion in California.
What did the Reubenites have to gain from allying themselves against the man who had led them from Egypt, initiating them into divine revelation, and remained responsive to their needs in the wilderness? They were betraying themselves. These rebels were not insignificant figures, but trusted community members. Despite all they had collectively experienced since Egypt, they sought to assert their right to lead the Jewish people to the land of Israel over Moses and Aaron.
Not only does the Jewish rabbi say that the companions of Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, were corrupt, but that they tried to assert their right for leadership over Prophet Moses and his successor, Aaron, peace be upon them. So the Jewish position not only matches the Shia view of the companions being corrupt, but that they were corrupt for the same reason, for vying for power from their prophet and his rightful successor, exactly as the great cycle states happened again and again throughout history with the prophets of God. Rabbi Greenstein even stresses that these were not insignificant figures. These companions were trusted community members that were with Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, since the time of slavery in Egypt. With Rabbi Greenstein's clarification, we now understand that the Jewish position is not that the companions were the best of the nation, but rather that a segment of the companions were the best of the nation, like Aaron and others, and a segment of the companions were the worst of the nation, like those Rabbi Greenstein spoke of.
And finally, the Jewish position should be here.
Well, 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 how the tables have turned. Look who's isolated now, if it isn't so-called Sunni Islam, all the way in this tiny little corner, all by itself, with all the other religions comfortably on the right. Every group seems to have a nuanced approach, in that segments of the companions were the best, segments of companions were the worst, and segments of companions were in the middle. But it's only so-called Sunni Islam that wants the world to believe that all the companions were the best of the nation. Tell me, Ibn Taymiyya lovers, which of these positions is really the implausible one? You may have already figured out why all these subtle, vague adjustments they've made are so critically important in allowing the deception in this argument to work. We can more clearly see the intentionality behind the deception when we map out all of these subtle, vague changes relative to each other. You can see that instead of using the nuanced position of each group, resulting in the horizontal split, with so-called Sunni Islam isolated on the left, they merged the religions by way of vagueness to the companions. So-called Sunnis, in this manner, get shifted to the right, while all the rest get shifted to the left. With this merging, they are able to create a new split vertically by emphasizing the stereotypical Christian and Jewish view of the companions of their prophet being the best, and emphasizing the stereotypical Shia view of the companions of their prophet being the worst. These subtle and carefully crafted adaptations make Jews and Christians appear to be aligned with the supposed more rational so-called Sunni position, and makes the Shia position appear to be isolated and absurd. This is the deception of the companion's paradox argument. But believe you me, this is merely an iceberg of the deceptive tactics used by the earliest so-called Sunni scholars. They were masters in deception. What I've revealed today could not have been an accident. The vagueness is so carefully crafted, so carefully structured, so carefully molding the real facts to bend and deliver a specific intended end result. The structural deception could not have been through anything other than an intellect with a deceptive intention. It has the fingerprints of design written all over it. And with that all out of the way, let us carry out the final step. Let us return back to our table and make the necessary amendments. So-called Sunnis claim not the, but all companions of their prophet were the best of the nation. Jews claim not the, but segments of companions of their prophet were the best and worst of the nation. Christians also claim segments of companions of their prophet were the best and worst of the nation. Shia also claim segments of companions of their prophet were the best and worst of the nation. Therefore, a companion of a prophet being the worst of the nation is entirely plausible. With the vagueness eliminated, we'll call this the specific form of the companion's paradox argument. Upon removing the vagueness and arriving at the argument's actual conclusion, the thing that becomes apparent is that it is the so-called Sunni position that is absurd and implausible. But even with all the dismantling that took place, I don't know what it is. I just can't stop. The argument just has me so inspired. The argument just has so much more potential. It can be refined and developed so much more than it already has. In the next video, I'll be leveling up this argument from arguing from plausibility up to arguing from probability. I'll be doing this by considering the prophecies of various prophets of God. If you haven't already, gain some background knowledge by checking out my video essay titled Companions in Hell, the Forgotten Prophecies of Bukhari. In that video, I outlined some of the reports found in so-called Sunni books of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family, himself prophesying that his companions will betray him after his death. In the next video of this series, I'll be returning to some of those prophecies and comparing them to prophecies found in the Bible and Torah, attributed to Prophet Moses and Prophet Jesus, peace be upon them, where they prophesied similar about their own companions. Yes, they also prophesied that their companions will betray them after their death, just as the great cycle of history stipulates. See you next time.